the words caught in Maria Santos's throat like broken glass, each syllable a struggle against years of conditioning that had taught her to speak only when spoken to make herself small, to never draw attention. I'm just a victim," she whispered into the Family Feud microphone, her voice barely audible above the studio's ambient noise, her head bowed as if expecting punishment for daring to speak at all. Beside her, 12-year-old Isabella Santos felt her heart break a little more as she watched her mother shrink into herself on national television. For 6 months, Isabella had been watching Maria slowly emerge from the shell that 10 years of domestic violence had created. But moments like this reminded them both how far they still had to go. Steve Harvey felt the energy in the studio shift immediately. In his decades of hosting, he had developed an instinct for recognizing when contestants were carrying burdens heavier than stage nerves. Something about Maria's posture, the way she flinched slightly when he moved too quickly, the careful way she chose her words. It all painted a picture that made Steve's chest tighten with recognition and concern. The question had seemed innocent enough. "Name a word you'd use to describe yourself." It was the kind of broad, personal question that usually generated confident answers like strong, funny, or hardworking. But Maria's response had stopped the game cold, revealing depths of pain that transcended entertainment and touched something much more profound about survival and identity. "Let me take you back to how we got here." 6 months earlier, Maria Santos had been living in what looked like a beautiful suburban home in Phoenix, Arizona, married to Miguel Santos, a successful contractor who was respected in their community and beloved by their neighbors. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect family, a devoted husband, a quiet wife, and a bright daughter who earned good grades and participated in school activities. But behind closed doors, Maria's life had been a carefully choreographed dance of fear, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering Miguel's explosive rage. For 10 years, since Isabella was 2 years old, Maria had endured emotional, psychological, and physical abuse that had systematically stripped away her sense of self-worth, her confidence, and her belief that she deserved anything better. Miguel's abuse had been insidious in its progression. It had started with criticism disguised as concern, comments about her appearance, her parenting, her housekeeping, always delivered with the implication that he was trying to help her be better. Gradually, the criticism became more frequent and harsher, accompanied by restrictions on her freedom. She couldn't work outside the home because he needed her available. She couldn't maintain friendships because other people gave her bad ideas. She couldn't make decisions about money, about Isabella's activities, about anything that mattered, because he knew what was best for their family. The physical violence had escalated slowly too, beginning with grabbing that left bruises, progressing to slaps that he immediately apologized for, and eventually becoming systematic beatings that he carefully planned to avoid leaving visible marks. Maria had learned to wear long sleeves in summer, to use makeup to cover bruises, and to craft explanations for injuries that wouldn't raise suspicions. Isabella had grown up watching her mother become smaller and quieter with each passing year. At 12, she was wise beyond her years, having learned to read her father's moods, to intervene when possible, and to protect her mother in whatever small ways she could. She had seen Maria flinch when doors slammed, apologize for things that weren't her fault, and cry silently when she thought Isabella wasn't watching. The night that changed everything had come 6 months ago, when Miguel's rage had escalated beyond anything Maria had experienced before. Isabella had tried to defend her mother during one of Miguel's tirades, and in that moment, Maria had seen her own future reflected in her daughter's terrified eyes. The realization that Isabella might grow up thinking this was normal, that she might accept abuse as love, had given Maria a strength she didn't know she possessed. In the middle of the night, while Miguel slept off his anger and alcohol, Maria had packed 2 small bags, taken Isabella's hand, and walked out of the house that had been her prison for a decade. They had driven to the nearest women's shelter, Maria's hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the steering wheel, both of them crying as they crossed the threshold into safety. The Haven House Women's Shelter had become their sanctuary and their school for learning how to live without fear. Maria had attended counseling sessions, support groups, and life skills classes, while Isabella had been enrolled in the shelter's children's program, where she learned that her father's behavior wasn't normal or acceptable, and that her mother's decision to leave had been incredibly brave. Dr. Patricia Williams, the shelter's lead counselor, had worked with Maria for months to help her understand that she wasn't responsible for Miguel's abuse, that she hadn't deserved the treatment she received, and that survival took tremendous strength. But even after 6 months of therapy and support, Maria struggled to see herself as anything other than a victim, someone who had failed to protect herself, who had allowed terrible things to happen, who was fundamentally damaged by her experiences. The Family Feud opportunity had come through the shelter's community outreach program. The show was featuring Survivors and Heroes Week, celebrating people who had overcome adversity and rebuilt their lives. Dr. Williams had suggested that Maria and Isabella apply, thinking it might be a confidence-building experience and a chance for Maria to see herself through different eyes. Maria had initially resisted the idea. "I'm not a hero," she had told Dr. Williams. "Heroes are people who save others. I couldn't even save myself until it was almost too late." But Isabella had been enthusiastic about the opportunity. "Mom, you are a hero. You saved both of us. You were brave enough to leave. That's what heroes do. They make hard choices to protect people they love." Eventually, Maria had agreed to apply, more for Isabella's sake than her own. When they were selected, she had been terrified about appearing on national television, worried about Miguel seeing the show, and finding them, concerned about embarrassing herself or Isabella. But the shelter staff had assured her that their safety was the top priority, and that this could be an opportunity to show other women that escape was possible. During the drive from Phoenix to the Atlanta studios, Maria had been quiet and nervous, while Isabella had tried to keep her spirits up by talking about meeting Steve Harvey and maybe winning money that could help them get their own apartment. Maria had smiled and nodded, but her mind had been occupied with fears about being judged, about not being articulate enough, about somehow failing her daughter again. The studio environment had been overwhelming for Maria. Bright lights, loud music, crowds of people, cameras everywhere. Everything about it was the opposite of the quiet, controlled environment she had learned to navigate during her marriage. She had felt exposed and vulnerable, fighting the urge to flee back to the safety of invisibility. During the family introductions, Maria had struggled to speak clearly about their situation. "I'm Maria Santos," she had said softly, "and this is my daughter, Isabella. We're from Phoenix, and we're starting over." Steve had sensed her nervousness immediately and had approached with extra gentleness. "Starting over, huh? That takes courage. What made you decide it was time for a fresh start?" Maria had looked at Isabella, who had given her an encouraging nod. We left a difficult situation. We're staying at Haven House Women's Shelter now, and they're helping us build a new life." The audience had responded with warm, supportive applause, and Steve had nodded with respect and understanding. "That's what strength looks like. That's what protecting your family looks like. You should be proud of that decision." But even Steve's kind words hadn't been enough to overcome years of programming that told Maria she was worthless, weak, and responsible for everything that had gone wrong in her life. The game had progressed slowly, with Maria participating minimally and Isabella carrying most of the family's responses. The Santos family was playing against the Rodriguez family from California, and both teams were supportive and encouraging rather than competitive. When Maria did buzz in with answers, she apologized immediately afterward, as if taking up space or being heard was something she needed forgiveness for. Isabella had noticed her mother's struggle and had tried to boost her confidence between rounds. "Mom, you're doing great. Your answers are really good. Don't apologize for being smart." But it was during the 4th round that the moment arrived that would change everything for Maria Santos. Steve had announced the survey question with his usual energy. "Name a word you'd use to describe yourself." The question hung in the air, deceptively simple but carrying different weight for different people. For most contestants, it would be an easy opportunity to share positive self-perception. But for Maria, standing on that stage in front of millions of viewers, the question forced her to confront the fundamental way she saw herself after a decade of being told she was worthless. Isabella had stepped forward to answer for the family. But something made Maria speak first. Maybe it was the studio lights, or the weight of all the therapy sessions where she'd been asked similar questions, or simply the fact that, after months of silence, she finally had a microphone in front of her. I'm just a victim," Maria had whispered, the words falling from her lips like a confession she'd been carrying for too long. The studio fell silent. Not the expectant quiet of an audience, waiting for the board to reveal whether an answer was correct, but the profound silence of people recognizing that they had just witnessed someone's deepest, most painful truth being spoken aloud. Steve Harvey slowly set down his index cards. In that moment, he wasn't a game show host, trying to keep energies high and entertainment flowing. He was a man recognizing that someone needed help, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop everything else and pay attention. "Hold up," Steve said, his voice carrying across the studio with quiet authority. "Stop the music. Stop the game. Stop everything." He walked away from his podium and approached Maria directly, his movements careful and non-threatening, understanding instinctively that sudden motions might frighten someone who had learned to associate unpredictability with danger. "Maria," Steve said gently, "can you look at me for a moment?" Maria raised her eyes slowly, expecting to see judgment or pity, but finding instead something she hadn't experienced in years: respect and recognition. "Maria, I need to tell you something. And I need everyone in this studio, and everyone watching at home to hear this too," Steve continued, his voice carrying the gravity of absolute sincerity. "You are not a victim. You are a survivor." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head slightly. "But I let it happen for so long. I didn't protect myself. I didn't protect Isabella. I was weak." Steve knelt down slightly so he could look directly into Maria's eyes. "No, ma'am. Weak people don't leave. Weak people don't walk away from everything they know to protect their children. Weak people don't start over with nothing. You did all of those things." He stood back up and addressed the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are looking at courage. Real courage. Not the kind that happens in movies, but the kind that happens in real life, when someone decides that they and their child deserve better, even when it means giving up everything else." Maria was crying now, years of suppressed emotion flowing out of her in front of 300 strangers and millions of television viewers. But for the first time in a decade, they weren't tears of shame or fear. They were tears of recognition. "I want to try something," Steve said, turning back to Maria. "I want you to answer that question again. But this time, I want you to think about what Isabella sees when she looks at you. What does your daughter see?" Maria looked at Isabella, who was crying too but smiling through her tears. "She sees someone who loves her enough to be brave," Isabella said softly. "She sees someone who protected us. She sees my hero." Steve nodded. "That's right. Now Maria, knowing that your daughter sees you as her hero, knowing that you had the strength to leave an impossible situation and build a new life, how would you describe yourself?" Maria took a shaky breath. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like speaking a language she had forgotten. But with Isabella watching, with Steve's encouraging presence, and with the weight of her own survival story behind her, she found her voice. I'm strong," Maria said, her voice growing clearer. "I'm a survivor. I'm a mother who protects her daughter. I'm someone who chose hope over fear." The studio erupted in applause, but Steve wasn't finished with this moment that had transcended entertainment and become something sacred. "Say it louder," Steve encouraged. "Say it so everyone can hear you." Maria straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and spoke with strength that surprised even her. "I'm strong. I'm a survivor. I'm a woman who refused to let my daughter grow up thinking that love is supposed to hurt." The applause grew even louder, but Steve raised his hand for quiet because he had something more to say. "Maria," Steve said, removing his suit jacket, "this jacket has been with me for every show I've hosted. But today, it belongs with someone who just reminded all of us what real strength looks like." He placed the jacket around Maria's shoulders, and as he did, he spoke quietly enough that only she and Isabella could hear. "You are not defined by what happened to you. You are defined by what you did about it. You are not a victim. You are a warrior." Maria pulled the jacket closer around herself, feeling for the first time in years like she was being protected instead of protecting herself. When she looked at Isabella, she saw not pity or embarrassment, but pure pride and love. "Mom," Isabella said, loud enough for the microphones to pick up, "I've always known you were strong. I'm so proud that everyone else gets to see it too." What happened after the cameras stopped rolling became the subject of articles, social media campaigns, and policy discussions about domestic violence support and survivor empowerment. The episode, when it aired, included resources for domestic violence survivors and became one of the most watched and shared in Family Feud history. But more importantly, Maria's moment of claiming her strength sparked conversations in homes across America about what survival looks like, what courage sounds like, and how society can better support women rebuilding their lives after abuse. Steve Harvey's foundation partnered with Haven House Women's Shelter to create a scholarship program for survivors pursuing education and job training. Maria became one of the first recipients, enrolling in a medical assistant program that would give her the skills and financial independence to build a stable life for herself and Isabella. The jacket that Steve gave Maria became a symbol of her transformation. She wore it to her graduation from medical assistant school, to her first day of work at a family practice clinic, and to the apartment lease signing, when she and Isabella moved into their own place for the first time in 18 months. Dr. Williams, from the shelter, often uses Maria's story in her counseling sessions with other survivors. Maria showed us something important. She tells women who are just beginning their healing journey, she showed us that strength isn't about never being a victim, it's about refusing to stay a victim. It's about choosing to see yourself as a survivor, and then living like one. Maria now works at the clinic, helps other survivors navigate the healthcare system, and speaks at local events about domestic violence awareness. Isabella, now 13, volunteers at the shelter's children's program, using her own experience to help other kids understand that their parents' courage to leave abusive situations is something to be proud of. Every year, on the anniversary of their Family Feud appearance, Maria and Isabella watch the episode together. It serves as a reminder not just of where they came from, but of the moment when Maria found her voice, claimed her strength, and chose to see herself as Isabella had always seen her, as a hero. The lesson that Maria Santos taught that day extends far beyond domestic violence or women's issues. She reminded the world that survival is strength, that choosing hope over fear is an act of courage, and that sometimes the most important moment in your life happens when you finally see yourself the way the people who love you have always seen you. Steve Harvey learned that day that the most powerful moments in television aren't scripted. They're discovered when you create space for people to claim their truth, their strength, and their value. Sometimes a game show host can do more than entertain. Sometimes he can help someone transform from seeing themselves as a victim to knowing they're a survivor. Maria often says that the Family Feud appearance didn't change who she was. It revealed who she had always been, underneath the trauma and fear. It reminded her that strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about refusing to let the hurt define you forever. Because that's what survival looks like. That's what courage sounds like. And that's what happens when a woman who has been told she's worthless for years finally hears and believes that she's actually extraordinary. Proving that the most important victories happen not when you win games, but when you reclaim your sense of self-worth and refuse to let anyone else determine your value ever again. The microphone may have fallen silent that day, but Maria's voice continues to echo in domestic violence shelters, support groups, and counseling sessions across the country, reminding other survivors that they too are warriors, not victims, and that their stories of survival are actually stories of tremendous strength.